everyone. Welcome to the Cultivate podcast with the Grove Church. I am Charlie Lofton, the lead pastor there, and really glad that you are joining us today for our podcast. Have with us the expert, Mark Freeman, the expert on all things Bible, theology, Chick-fil-A.
No. Don't give me your spot.
That's me. Hey, thanks for being with us. As always, love having you here. If you have been with us, we have been doing this actually for, it seems like quite a while now. We did a series in our church recently for us, at least as far as when we were recording this, kind of asking and answering kind of some big picture questions. We talked about evil, the existence of God. We've talked about all sorts of things. And we've been, Mark and I have been discussing them even a little bit further here in our podcast, and then been doing some Q&As with our producer and awesome friend, Abigail. We've been doing that. And so we're continuing that, and we've got a big topic today. We're asking and answering the question, is Jesus Christ the only way to God? How would you say, like, we'll just jump in, like, with this, Mark. Is that a question that you feel like historically you have been asked a lot?
Yes, but not in those words.
Like in what, like?
But more as the assumption that there are many ways,
Right?
And sometimes the audacity to think or to say or to believe that the other way is not that there could be one way, but that there could be only one way. Yeah, that there's not many.
Right.
Yeah.
You find yourself getting that question more from believers who are trying to sort that issue out, people who aren't believers in anything, or people from other religions, or just a good old fashioned combo of all that?
Yeah, probably just a combo of all that. Yeah.
I feel like the most interaction that I've done around this was, I think, was in my college days and then my early days as a college minister. And I don't think it's becoming, not because it was the late 90s, I mean, I guess college and late college, I was all of the 90s was what I spent all the 90s at Hendrix College in Conway. Not because it was the 90s, but I just think because of the nature of the institution and the students there. A generally spiritual place, not particularly religious, a little more liberal in its thinkings. And it was just it seemed like when you were going to discuss religion, Jesus, Christianity, spirituality, the idea of one path versus multiple paths to God was just, it was what seemed like what we were always talking about.
Mm.
And so for me, and this is kind of where I'd like for us to start our discussion about it, to me it starts with, what is the nature of the gospel? And so when we say, are there multiple ways to God? Are there multiple paths to God? Let's just kind of maybe do a gospel refresh here a little bit. Mm. So I'm going to ask you the question, why do we even need a path to God?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and by the way, I think that's the great place to start, because we jump right past this part, and so it doesn't make sense. It looks like some kind of exclusive club. You make no sense of why Jesus would be the only way if you don't understand
right
how we got there to begin with. Yeah, I mean, our brokenness and distance from God, that really I've discovered everybody feels to some degree.
Right.
It's down in us. We know it, but that distance, that there is a God who is holy, and to be in his presence, we need to be able to be that. Like there's
right.
a separation that happens, that just like oil and water, if God is that, if he is good and he is right and he is holy, then he's going to separate from what's not. And a recognition of our brokenness is kind of where all that starts.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to stick with path metaphors, if we think, okay, well, we're sitting here at the Grove right now, and after this, I'm going home. How many different ways are there for me to get home? Well, depending on how long you go in the wrong direction, And there are an infinite number of ways for me to get home. But ultimately, there are just a handful, really. And some are better than others. Some are faster at certain times of day and depending on traffic or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of different ways. And so that sort of path imagery just kind of implies that I'm here and where I want to go is over there, and there's nothing keeping me from getting there.
Mm.
But if there is some sort of blockage, a blockade, or a gap. I mean, chasm metaphors, and I know that bridge metaphors have been really, popular in kind of describing the gospel. We're on one side of a cavern, God is on the other side of a cavern. Jesus uses gate/door imagery to describe it. There is a path, and the door is locked.
Mm-hmm.
There is a door, and if you want to get inside a house, you have to go through the door, right? You can't. You say, oh, you could dig a hole through the roof. Well, now you're just being ridiculous with the metaphor, right? But to get into the house, you have to go through the door. It's not just as is the most popular metaphor for people with a more liberal, different view of it. It's like I'm at the bottom of a mountain trying to get to the top. There are easier and harder ways to get there, but there are multiple paths. But I think the idea that there is something that has prevented us from being with God, it's almost like path is maybe not the best metaphor because it's like, because we're really talking about a relationship. There's not a relationship. There is a brokenness in the relationship. How do we mend it? How do we fix it? And so if sin is the issue and sin is causing this blockage, the gap, imprisonment, the locked door, whatever metaphor we want to use, right? What is the Christian answer? How do we unlock the door? How do we close the gap? What's the answer?
That God makes us clean through Jesus. If we place faith in him, that his death and resurrection overcame sin and death so that we could be back with God again. That basically that he has done the work, because that's, as you were talking about those different paths, each one of those insinuates that there's some standard of goodness that we're working to get to.
Right.
And this is the opposite answer, that good works are awesome, but we can't be good enough to be with God. We needed him to come to us and for us to yield and let him do what only he can do.
Yeah, I feel like we've missed really kind of the essence of the gospel and the essence of what Jesus did and why he did it when we get too stuck in kind of normal path imagery. Because like you say, Mike, it's I'm good enough, and I'm showing that I can get there. I am accomplishing something. I can climb this mountain. All that's between me and the top of the mountain is my own will, or the only thing that's keeping me from God is my ability and willingness to do better, be better, act better. Or maybe even a path like a quest. God is just putting you on a quest. This is kind of what the meaning of life is. The meaning of life is discovery. And there's lots of different ways you could discover this. Mm. There's lots of different paths to discovery, enlightenment, journey, those sorts of things. And so you need to find your path. I'll find my path. But ultimately, all the paths lead the same place. And that's again, I think that's just incomplete. Mm-hmm. It is the sin and brokenness that has made us unable to be in fellowship with God, and you can't be good enough to get your way out of that. Forgiveness has to happen, reconciliation has to happen, and that is something that only God can do. That's not something that we can do. So now, really, then the question is, if it's something that only God, if there's a problem between us and God, and only God can make it better, really the question is, has God chosen multiple different venues, vehicles, paths, or whatever to reconcile us. Which then gets us to what I will say is the definitive passage on this issue. I'm going to read it, and you feel free to drop some thoughts in after I read it, okay? It's John 14. We're going to start a little earlier than we normally do. John 14, verse 1. The disciples are kind of upset. The words here, they're troubled. Jesus is talking about leaving. He's talking about dying. He's talking about going away, and they're concerned about it. John 14, verse 1. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you are going, so how can we know the way? Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Philip said, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. Jesus answered, don't you know me, Philip, even after I have been among you such a long time? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? The words I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing his work. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me, or at least believe on the evidence of the works themselves. What stands out to you?
Well, first of all, just that claim. I mean, what everyone has to recognize that he just said something very different than other teachers and great, philosophers through history. People who have made great claims. Because one thing I would agree with is I've had friendships with people of different faiths and beliefs. If someone says, "Hey, yeah, basically, the 8 noble truths of Buddhism, or the 5 pillars of Islam, or the what you're supposed to do in the Southern Baptist church I grew up in,"
right?
And you start putting those lists all down on paper, and yeah, you're right. It is true. Those lists look very similar,
right?
And so that I don't deny that. But what Jesus is saying is not who keeps the list.
Right.
He's making a claim about himself and what he has done and who he is and how he can do the thing that we can't do because of who he is. I mean, the claim that I am the way. If we're going to discuss paths, it's not a list; it's a person. that's a.
I mean, to me, that is the thing that really does. You're right. That's the thing that just stands out the most.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would imagine. They're completely and totally confused by what he's saying in the first place. He's like, you may, so you can be with me where I am, and you know the way to the place where I'm going. And Thomas is like, one, we don't know where you're going, and if we have no idea where you're going, we couldn't possibly know the way.
What are you even talking about?
And then, and then Philip is like, just show us God then, and you can just tell that they're spinning. And again, like you said, you go to any religious teacher and say, show us the way. What is the way? You're most likely going to get some sort of list or some sort of moment of enlightenment where you realize you were the list the whole time. The list is knowing there is no list. That's kind of from the Matrix. There is no spoon. Anyways, have you seen the Matrix?
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right. So some personal enlightenment, or again some list, but he says something very different. Show us the way. How can we know the way? I am the way, and the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. He is not a teacher or a guru that shows us the way. He is not a teacher or a guru that teaches us truth. And he is not someone that is showing us how to have life. He is those 3 things.
Mm-hmm.
And then he makes a clear, definitive statement. No one comes to the Father except through me. I mean, a little bit it's game over.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make then
Is
of
there-
their? Go ahead.
No, you.
What do you then make of their interaction? Then is like I said, Jesus says all that, and he says, and Philip says, "Just show us the Father, and that will be enough." What do you make of Jesus' answer to that?
I've been here all along,
Right.
and you missed it.
Yeah. Don't you know me? I've been among you such a long time. If you have seen me, you have seen the Father. I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. It's one thing to say, well, the Father is in me. But once you kind of make it that kind of reciprocal thing, I am in the Father, and the Father is in me, there's a unity to that. Essentially, we are the same. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. He is... this is kind of the foundation laying for what will later be known in Christianity as the doctrine of the Trinity, or here it's the full deity of Jesus. He is making a case for them that I and the Father are one. Like I'm here. This is all you need, and it's not through my teaching. I'm the teaching. It's not follow my path. I'm the path. I'll point you to life. I'll give you life. I am life. It's all in him. And it is because of his unique relationship with the Father. And again, I think this goes to the thing that you were talking about, where it's like, we're not inviting people to a secret club. We're not saying our club is the best club.
Right.
This is very different than that.
Yeah. Yeah, to say there's only one club, and we're really, really thankful that there is one. When we start from that place of brokenness, it's like there's not another. There aren't a lot of paths. There's not another way. If we are broken beyond repair, then there's not a way.
Right.
And yet then Jesus does this incredible thing. That's very different than an exclusive club.
Dude, anybody who's watching on video, we've been fighting a fly. It's not one fly, bro.
It's multiple flies.
You have attracted a second fly.
I'm as long as it doesn't tickle my nose, I'm all right. But
okay, so we'll look at one more passage in 1 Timothy chapter 2, where Paul's talking about the very same topic. 1 Timothy 2, starting verse 1. I urge then, first of all, that petitions, prayer, intercessions, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. This is good and pleases God our Savior. So we're kind of starting here with this idea of we should pray for people in authority. We should pray for these people because we want them to be good, and when they're good, we're good, and this is pleasing to God. Why? Verse 4, he wants all people to be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. So we should be praying for people in leadership so that everybody can be at peace. This makes God happy because God wants everybody, leaders included, kings included, to find faith in Jesus. For there is one God and one mediator between God and mankind, the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself as a ransom for all people. This has now been witnessed to at a proper time. And for this purpose, I was appointed a herald and an apostle. I am telling the truth, I am not lying, and a true and faithful teacher of the Gentiles. And so he's talking about, man, you got this. It starts with this heart for just this specific group of people, and then ultimately, man, what you should be praying for is that they can find God. And then says, and there's only one way to do it. There's not multiple gods. There's only one God. And there is only one person who has, as we've been talking about, paid that price, been that mediator. You need a mediator. This God is not someone that you find. Mm-hmm. God is someone who makes peace with you. Which again is just a very different thing. It is a very different thing than what other world religions and this natural instinct that we have. Because if there's no problem between us and God, then there's no need for a path. And if there's no problem, well, maybe God just, a fun game of hide and seek.
Right.
And he's kind of given different hints to different people. And you can kind of get that, again, from a lot of different religious teachers, they've had some particular or believe that they have some particular insight or clue. And if we put all these clues together, we can figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what Jesus said. And it is not how probably the most significant teacher about Christianity since Jesus, the way that he talks about it and reflects it. They talk about it in ransom terms, saving terms, mediation, these sorts of things where there is a case has been made against you, a fine has been levied. So, all sorts of different imagery to describe. And the answer doesn't seem to be, at least according to Jesus, paying the fine back, working hard to get there. And so for me, there are two choices. There is Jesus if there are multiple ways, then Jesus isn't one of them. Do you make sense why I'm saying that?
Right, because it's a radically different thing he's saying.
Yeah, there's no overlap.
Right.
If you take the Jesus' death on the cross out of it, his death and his resurrection and the way that he talks about it, and just look at his moral teachings, like, oh, okay, well, we can make a Venn diagram maybe out of.
Well, but even that, I just think we've misinterpreted Jesus so badly that if you don't even talk about other world religions and you just talk about the way that in the US of A he has been presented. When I talk to people, and it's down even deep in me, like there's just this bend towards, if I can, change my behaviors,
right?
I can become. We don't realize that what we're saying is I can become as good as God, but it's as if that's attainable by, behavioral modification. But then Jesus comes on the scene, and even in his teaching, Sermon on the Mount, he's like, man, you got to be poor in spirit. Not that you attain and then are able to say to God, look at me, you've met your match.
Right.
I'm as good as you are. But it begins with the yielding. And then when he gets to the commands, he's like, and here's the next level for you. You think it's don't murder.
Right.
This is the level. What's going on in your heart? And the truth is, even people who morally are very good, man, we go heart level and the game changes. And so Jesus is like, no, you're not, and you can't, but I can do that.
Right.
I can make you that way. That supernatural power.
It seems like even if you just look at Jesus's teachings, what he's describing is how all the paths are blocked. Because even as you were talking, I was reminded of this one thing that he says, which is, unless you are more righteous than the Pharisees, you won't enter the kingdom. And by most people's definition of righteous, of good person, of highly religious, they were the elite of the elite. You've got to supersede that. Well, how? They were following the law perfectly. Sure, maybe they were kind of jerks sometimes, but on the whole, right, by all known definitions of righteousness, they were the pinnacle. It's like you got to go better than that. And it was meant to lead you to desperation. In the same way Paul describes the law was meant to bring you to a point of desperation. Or the rich young ruler. Hey, what do I need to do? Oh, you just need to follow all the commands. I've done that. I can only imagine. I wish I had like a picture of Jesus' face. Really? All of them? All the time? And I love how one of the ones he dropped in there was honor your father and mother. Like, what person in the history of the world has from the time of their birth always honored their father and mother? And so Jesus is like, okay, I see what's going on here. So let me make sure you understand. Well, here's one. Sell everything you have then. And he walked away sad, but really the point was not walk away sad, but to walk towards Jesus humble. Mm-hmm. This path block. You can't be good enough, can't be good enough. And let me draw you the picture in case some of you, Pharisees, think you can be good enough. here's really what these laws mean. You can't be good. It's supposed to lead us to a place of brokenness, not to a point of enlightenment, not to a point of, all right, well, I just need to redouble my efforts, but a point of, one of the what the disciples said to Jesus. Jesus is like, I tell you this, it's easier for a camel to walk through a needle than it is for a rich person to find God. And
like, what?
And you imagine Jesus like, okay, you just about there. You're just about there. With God, all things are possible. And it is, again, a camel can only walk through the eye of a needle if God does a miracle. And that's where Jesus is pointing us. And so you've got Jesus saying it, you've got Paul saying it, and the last one I'll reference is in Acts chapter 2. It's the sermon right after Pentecost. And Peter's explaining the gospel to everybody, and it kind of ends it with, and there is no other name that has been given, heaven, earth, anywhere, by which you can be saved except this one. And so at a minimum, we're gonna break this down into two parts. At a minimum, what I feel like that we have done here right now is to say the Bible teaches that Jesus is the only hope we have to be with God, to find God, to be on a path to God, the only way to God, right? The Bible teaches that. And by that, I mean Jesus said it. The first sermon after Jesus' resurrection, the head of the apostles, Peter, he said it in his very first gospel sermon. And the primary person meant to teach us theology around and process exactly what all of Jesus' death and resurrection meant, he said it. It's just hard to argue that, right? I mean, obviously all three of them are wrong. Like I said, so then Jesus isn't a path, because he was greatly mistaken. I'm not the judgmental one for believing that Jesus is the only way. I'm the dummy that believed the judgmental one, Jesus, who said it. And Peter who said it. And Paul who said it. And so, but having navigated this question a lot in more, like I said, in more kind of liberal academic environments, and for you, probably in more multicultural, other religion contexts, there are a lot of questions that people have about that. Is this really true? And if this is true, what does this mean? What does this mean about people from other religions, about people who never hear about Jesus, all these kinds of things? And so we're going to spend some time talking about that next. And I hope you will join us back for that, as we kind of wanted to lay the groundwork here of kind of just the theology of what the Bible actually teaches on this topic. And then we'll follow it back up next time with some asking and answering some deeper questions about this that are very common that people have when they're wrestling with this idea. So we'll do that. We'll do that next time. You in?
Oh yeah.
Great. We got to have the expert back with us. Hey, it's been a pleasure being with you. I'm so glad you joined us. I'm Charlie, the lead pastor at the Grove. We got Mark here. We would love to connect with you. You can find us at thegrovechurch.org/connect. We'd love to see you on a Sunday. You can join us online. Any way that we can help you, please let us know, and please join us again next time. Thanks again for joining us.